Hi, Matt. I was looking forward to talking to you.
I really get turned on by like good ideas and good stories.
I've been cursed and blessed with an overactive imagination.
If people like it or whether they don't like it, no consequence to me. I prefer that they liked it. Even just saying that made the hairs on my arm stand up.
MattLees Gets Creative contains themes and subjects that may not be suitable for everyone listening. If you're easily offended, we suggest that you get your podcast on elsewhere.
This time on MattLees Gets Creative.
You know, one of the jobs I worked on was conceptual art for a live action project. And I'm a cartoonist, and they hired me to come in and draw realistic weapons and armors and design props and stuff. Right. And so for me, it was like, okay, here I am in the art department with a team of equally talented artists, and we're working on this cool stuff. And I hand off my concepts to my art director. Then he takes some of that. He's like, oh, I like a bit of this, and I like a bit of her stuff over there, and a bit of his stuff.
Yeah.
And he creates the final concept, and you're like, dude, that was awesome.
Adam Munoa is a Salt Lake City-based character illustrator working out of his home studio. He has worked in the video game, interactive children's book, and live-action film markets, and he also works as a professor teaching digital painting and other critical thinking drawing classes at Utah Valley University. And he's also proof that sometimes changing your path can be a good thing. Hell, a great thing. Adam Munoa is my guest this week on MattLees Gets Creative. Thank you for all your continued support for this brand new show. Make sure you follow us at ML Gets Creative. Maybe tell some friends, and I'd love it if you'd leave a review. Thanks for listening. Again, thank you very much for doing it. The idea behind the show is I'm a musician and a podcaster, and I thought it would be cool to sit down and talk with other creative types to see if we all have the same blessings and curses. And I'm sure that'll come up as we talk about it. I think you're on board with me already, knowing what I mean by that. So we could just kind of start with yourself and where art started for you overall, really. I mean, was there an initial twig that caught you and that was it for you, or?
I come from a family of creatives, which is kind of cool. My dad and my grandpa, they were all musicians and expressed themselves creative. I grew up around them. My dad was in a rock and roll band pretty much my whole life until after high school. Excuse me. And so I was always around that, but I'll grab a drink.
Sure.
Apologize.
No.
My dad, actually, one of his first jobs when I was little, he was a cartoonist.
Cool.
And so he worked for an airline company doing slides and presentations and things like that. And I remember as a little kid going to his office and always seeing that stuff and seeing all the illustrative art supplies out there. And he had a really cool set of repeated graph pens that I looked at as a kid, like, oh, those are neat. But, of course, I wasn't really allowed to mess with any of it. But, so I was exposed to art. My mom was a huge Disney fan. We lived just about an hour away from Disneyland. And so we were watching a lot of animated films. And, my mom read to us this Disney children's book that had basically all the films up to that point novelized. And, so I got to look at all these illustrations and just loved them.
Yeah.
And then I was in elementary school and I saw, or our teacher was having us do some decorations for Christmas. And we were to make some Christmas tree countdown rings. So we had the kind of a Christmas tree that we'd decorate with ornaments or whatever. And then we were to produce these little tear-off chains that we would tear off each one until we got to Christmas. And I remember grabbing a handful of crayons, be like, oh, what am I going to do? And the first thing I drew, or I thought to myself, was like, well, it was the 80s, and I was a huge He-Man fan.
Yeah.
And so I was going to draw He-Man. And so I sat down and I scribbled it out with some crayons, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've done it. I've drawn He-Man.
Right.
And I was hooked from then. So about five, maybe 6 years old. I was 5 at the time.
Yeah.
So that was it. All of a sudden I'm like, wow, I can take something that I think of in my mind and I can draw it on paper. And I can't remember not ever drawing since then.
Yeah, and it's that amazing moment, isn't it? Because I'm always blown away by people who can create exactly like that. When you can say to somebody, "Draw me a Ninja Turtle," and I could draw you a Ninja Turtle, but it is not going to look like a Ninja Turtle, So when people can draw it, and I'm like, no, that's actually Michelangelo, and no, that's actually Raphael. Your image, for example, on your website with Raphael in his undercover outfit, that's an incredible drawing, and I'm always fascinated by people because you made that. I know I've made that very juvenile. I've made it very basic and small, but you made that. You turned that and created that completely. And for me, that's always incredible. That's why I love art so much. Visually, I can't do any of it, and I think that's part of what I love so much about it. And there's also that unique style for each artist, which I like, which again, you yourself do have that incredibly unique style. Once you know it, you look at that and you go, that's Adam's style. And I mean that in a good way, because they're all awesome. You could see them almost in the same set of collector's cards, if that makes sense, because they seem like they're one running theme, which are phenomenal. So was there a moment for you early when you figured out that you were actually pretty good at this thing? I asked the same question in every episode of the show to my guest, be it actors, be it musicians. Was there a moment where you thought, I'm actually pretty good at this?
I think it was, I don't know, after that I just kept drawing all the time. And then I just kind of became that kid that was always good at art, and I'd go to my dad, and I don't even remember my dad being a cartoonist until I was older, which is weird. But I'd always go to him like, Dad, show me how to draw this. Dad, show me how to draw that. And then eventually it started turning like, hey, kid, you're better than I am.
Right.
Stop, not necessarily stop coming to me, but why don't you show me how to draw that?
Yeah. Hey, kid, show me how to draw this. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was probably about 1989 when the first Tim Burton Batman came out.
Right.
And I was just blown away. I'd never seen Batman portrayed like that. And I remember sitting down and drawing, and in my mind, now looking back, I'm like, it probably wasn't as great as I thought it was. But I remember thinking like, wow, I've drawn Batman, and it looks just like the movie version, because I could see the visual elements of the movie, and I would draw them. Oh, excuse me.
That's okay.
That was my alarm to Skype you.
Nice.
But I remember visually looking at that movie and thinking about the distinct art direction in that film, and trying to draw that as a kid. And I remember taking the bus home from school, and some jerk kid ripped it out of my hands as I was drawing, and hey, he's drawing Batman. And I'm like, I was embarrassed, but then all of a sudden, like, kids are like, dude, that's awesome. I'm like, hell yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. There's that, 'cause there always seems to be that, maybe with every creative person I talk to, and with myself, we always almost use the word shame, but there's like that hidden thing of like, oh, I shouldn't show people this. And I don't think it's shame, but it maybe kind of feels that way as a creative person. You're in that shell of like, oh, I should totally show these people how cool I can draw, but no, I totally shouldn't show these people how I can draw.
Well, sometimes I still feel like I'll go out like to a coffee shop or to the mall, and I'll draw people, or I'll start sketching people from life. And I still have that kind of like reserved, like I hide down with my sketchbook, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I can do this. Or I'll have my iPad out. And it's just funny because, I remember being in the airport just not even that long ago, and I'm drawing people, just observational stuff. And this old lady kind of leans over my shoulders like, are you an artist? And she had like, like she'd been smoking for about 100 years. And I'm like, yeah, and she's like, what are you drawing? I'm like, people. She's like, oh, that's really great, and it was like, but it was still that kind of, maybe it's that trauma experience on the bus when I was 12, or 10 or 11.
Yeah.
But, nowadays it's fun, and I own it for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's always that moment. I think mine was at a campfire trying to impress girls, and doing a really, really bad job of Wonderwall. And I mean, it was too early for me. I ran before I could walk, or whatever the expression is. And for me, I think that's my shame moment of like, oh no. But then you have the better moments where you think, no, that was just, this is actually really cool. It sounds like we're similar ages based on influences. You already dropped a He-Man reference. So you probably grew up on all the same stuff as me. That's Ninja Turtles, He-Man.
Yep.
And I think that must have been such a cool time to grow up visually, because I'm not a visual artist, but I look at cartoons these days and I'm like, that's not as cool as they were in my day, man, because it was real.
I hear you.
Those aren't, like I was saying earlier, those aren't the Ninja Turtles. What are these things? if you grew up with like that, that must bother you too, I think.
It's funny because I remember it was when I was in college, and my friend was introduced me to this new show called Adventure Time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking at the trailer and be like, oh, I can't do this. It's not what I grew up with.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is we took a road trip, and we had my wife's car and had a DVD player. And so I listened to Adventure Time before I really sat down and watched it. And I fell in love with the writing. And I was like, whoa, this is great. And then I'd go back and kind of tolerate
the art,
the stuff. And then all of a sudden I actually fell in love with kind of like how they interpreted things. And I have a couple of friends that worked on the show, and, it just blew my mind, but I had to kind of listen to it first to appreciate the writing.
Yeah.
Whereas a kid growing up with like the Thundercats, or growing up with the Ninja Turtles, or growing up with even the Super Friends, if you will, it was like, to me, it was like this visual smorgasbord. Like, I want to see that. And that opening to Thundercats was so good. Yeah. And we never got that in the cartoon, but the opening was so good. I was like, man, this is great. Or seeing Silverhawks, or, all this really cool, iconic 80s stuff that my kids, I'll show it to them now. They're like, that's so dumb, Dad.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, and I can't say their stuff's dumb because all my friends work on it and I actually really like it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you didn't grow up with the cool stuff.
No. Yeah. You kids these days. I still remember the moment I saw the opening for Real Ghostbusters. And of course, back then, no internet, no magazine to tell me this was coming. So just one day this commercial comes on. And because I was the music guy, whereas you was the art guy. So the first thing I heard was that as the camera, the cartoon panned down, and I thought, that's Ghostbusters. And then it came up, and there's the ghost. And I was like, and there was no DVRs. That concept didn't exist to me. It was just like, I have to live on this chair now forever because I don't know when that cartoon's going to be on. Do you ever go back and watch them though and have that thing of like, oh, it doesn't for me, the art always holds up, and the music and things. Some of those stories, man, I don't remember them being that cheesy when we were kids.
Yeah, every single one of them, which is sad. But I'll go back. The only one I can kind of still really watch and not kind of cringe at is Voltron. Right. But like the Thundercats is bad. He-Man's really hard to watch. When they first came on DVD, I got the entire series. Yeah. I'm like, all right, kids, we're gonna sit down. And my kids are young at the time, and they're watching. I'm like, okay, well, it has a moral at the end, But I still love the backgrounds and the paintings and stuff. But it was just, Funimation was trying to do things on the cheap, and
and you get those moments where like, oh, this isn't very good, but you can only say it inside because you can't admit to them that my problem with He-Man when we watched it was the scene transition, like every 20 seconds where it goes, "Hey man," and it's 7 times louder than everything else happening, and it would terrify me every time. So I couldn't, but we did watch through She-Ra as well. So there's some of those. Now, today's stuff, is there stuff, I know you said you have friends that work on some of it. Is there stuff that you've worked on or that you would love to work on? I mean, I know the easy answer is I'd love to work on everything, but I'm sure there's something where you're like, man, I'd really like to work on.
I mean, the easy answer is everything. But if there's a show that I had to pick right now that I'd like to work on, I'd probably say DuckTales.
Oh, thank you. Love it.
It's done in such a good way that pays tribute to the original, but it's not just a copy, but then it's not some new out of this world remake,
Yeah.
I just think it's done so well, and looking at the art production and the visual and the acting and the stories, they're just fun. And actually I sit down with my kids and we can watch it and just laugh and just get excited. And, I just think if I had my pick of any current show today, that would be the one that I would probably want to work on the most.
I love it. And I love that you gave that answer on a little side joke that'll probably stick between us, and I won't put it in the actual show, but I have a friend who hates on DuckTales for the very reason that himself and I had an argument about, is DuckTales or is it not a franchise? So anyway, this was, I think 2 years ago now, and any chance I get, I send him memes or GIFs of DuckTales. I send him myself singing it. No word. I've been doing it for so long to him that I'm almost traumatizing him. So the fact that you mentioned DuckTales is a clip that I'm going to send him, and I can't wait for him to hear. He's going to think I set it up. He's going to think I messaged you and said, mention DuckTales.
No. I have 2 good friends. One's an old friend I grew up drawing with back in the day, and he's an animator on it. Another friend, he's a background guy. So, I mean, it's
such a great show. I mean, I'll be honest. I struggled at first looking at it, right? Because I was like, no, that's not DuckTales.
But then you kind of get, like you were saying about the other show, you get into the story a bit, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm in. Okay, this is the new DuckTales now. We were recently at Disneyland in Paris, which is close to here, and we waited in line to meet Scrooge McDuck, and I was like a little kid. Like, that's why you go to these places, right? Like,
oh yeah,
it was incredible. And when I met him, I had one of the gold coins you can buy at Disneyland in my pocket. So of course I showed it to Scrooge McDuck, and I was like, let's see if this guy's done his homework. And Scrooge McDuck went nuts, like chasing me around to get this gold coin off of me. And I was like, I'm a grown man in his mid-30s with no children. I'm at Disneyland, and this is one of the greatest moments I've ever had, ever. And I think that's what's so cool about these cartoons, that they just live on. The photos within reach of me.
Oh.
Of my
That's
wife,
great.
myself, and Scrooge, and I have all the figures sitting up of the new DuckTales. So it's one of those things. Disney is so pure, I think, and DuckTales is so incredible. If I were going to pitch anything, just looking only visually for your work, I would love to see you do some Dr. Zeus stuff, because I thought your Grinch that you posted at Christmas was awesome and grimy and looked like he smelled bad, and he did have garlic in his soul. Like it was, I think a Grinch series drawn by yourself could be something phenomenal. I mean, I can't make any decisions. I'm in a small.
That'd be a dream come true. I mean, Peter Geisel has been that's Dr. Seuss, but he's been such a huge influence on me visually. I mean, I can remember looking at those books as a kid. And the fun thing is they're multi-generational. So I'll sit down and read those same books with my kids, and they get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what I love about the Grinch so much. The story, especially, is you get the story. What did you think of the new release of Grinch this year? Did you get to see it?
I did get to see it. We went opening day, and I want to applaud everyone that worked on it. But for me, it was lacking just a little bit in that kind of nastiness. Because I felt like when you see his lair, it doesn't feel cold and miserable and like he's stuck in his own mind. It felt like warm and inviting and happy, And for me, that was kind of some of the, Yarrow Chaney I can't remember how to say his last name. Chaney is one of my favorite production designers. Mm-hmm. And, everything looked good, but it just didn't feel like that kind of.
It wasn't grimy enough.
Yeah, I felt like he was. I didn't relate to him as kind of like being a mean, nasty, conflicted kind of person, which is hard for me to say because I really love the character and stuff. And, it's not to take anything away from the people that worked on it by far, but yeah, I wanted kind of a nastier, and not say that Jim Carrey's was perfect, but you look back to the Chuck Jones one, and I think that really captured the essence of the Grinch, and he's just
Well, he's supposed to be borderline horrible, right? So we watch it every year, all the versions. I don't know why I've always loved that character so much. I think I really do. It's because I'm really grumpy too, But so where was your start as far as professional? Because I know that you also teach some art classes as well. So where was the change for you where you got to start making money from art? Because I'm sure, like all of us, you were an artist on the side, but working a day job. And I know that can be a really torturous experience, whether it's music, acting, drama, whether it's art. So talk to me a little bit about that transitional phase, if there was one, or was it more gradual?
So it's I've had an interesting career as an artist. My first professional gig, I think, was in the 7th grade. I got hired to do the T-shirts for my middle school. Yeah. And they said, hey, we would love for you to design this. We're going to pay you $50, which to a 7th grader was just, my mind was blown. I'm like, $50, all right, Mom, dinner's on me tonight,
Yeah.
And so I was pretty hyped on that. So that was my first gig where I actually got paid money, and then they sold all my T-shirts. So you go to the student store, and there was my design with our school mascot and all that stuff, and it was kind of cool. And the funny thing is my not funny, but my grandparents passed away in the last couple of years, but my grandma had kept the T-shirt perfect in a bag, and so I actually have an original one of those T-shirts.
That's awesome.
From when I
when you did it all the way back then, So
and so when they were cleaning everything out, they handed it to me like, "Hey, here you go." I'm like, whoa,
that's
awesome.
Like a time warp because you hadn't seen it in forever, I imagine.
Yeah, probably. Gosh, 25 years.
Yeah,
maybe maybe longer, you know?
Yeah.
So
Was there a little piece of you? Because I know if I hear old demos of myself on music takes and things like that, there's part of me that's like, yeesh. Because now obviously you're a professional. You look back at old stuff and you're like, oh, I'm glad I kept at it. Let's just say that. That's how I feel about myself when I hear really old stuff, you know?
Yeah.
At least I stuck to it.
Yeah. Looking at that, I'm like, you know what? For that time and for as little training as I had, I'm like, I was pretty happy with it. You know, the hands and feet are terrible, which is true with most people until they finally just embrace it.
Yeah.
But overall design, it's like, you know what, for a 12, 13-year-old kid, it's not bad. You know, some of the stuff I looked at in high school, I was like, oh, whoosh, you know?
Yeah. It's funny. That's a running theme with artists, hands and feet. You would never think that, but I hear it. I've watched so many documentaries and different news over the years. You always hear hands and feet. I don't know whether you could even quantify it in words, but what's so hard about hands and feet?
I think as artists, we tend to stick to the face, right? So we fill up sketchbooks and pads of paper with all these faces, and because we draw our favorite characters, all that stuff. But then when we get down to the anatomy, all of a sudden putting a body on them is like, ugh. And then you get to the hands, which we overcomplicate them. But my students, you know, I teach at a local college, and we go over hands a lot, you know, and they can't hide the hands, especially if the assignment requires it. And so we break down the hand into the simplest shapes, and then I show them how to do that. But I think it's like the face is super complicated, and we look at the face all the time, and it's so we spend a lifetime literally learning how to draw the face, and then they come in at maybe a high school or collegiate level, and all of a sudden they're like, oh man, I've got to do this. And your clients want hands. Your hands are expressive. You know, I'm using my hands, waving them all over the place right now. But, you know, simplifying them and learning, like, you know, hands aren't that bad. You know, I think it's pretty.
Yeah, it's funny that there's certain things you always hear that is the recurring theme, the struggles that different artists have and things like that. So you mentioned teaching. That must be a really cool experience, especially teaching art.
Yeah, it's a trip. So after high school, I ended up, I'm also a mechanic. I worked on cars growing up, and my dad and grandpa all raced stuff. And I started going to school for art, but then, you know, I got married a few years later in my early 20s. And my wife and I found out we were pregnant with our first child when I was in school. And I was like, I gotta make some money. So I ended up kind of fixing cars on the side, and then school became less important. And then I kind of dropped out of school and had an entirely different career as a mechanic, and I opened up my own performance garage and did this all stuff. But I was always coming home drawing, scribbling. But, you know, it was funny because a friend of mine called me up, and he worked for Disney up here in Salt Lake. And he's like, hey, do you want to come see what I do? And I was like, heck yeah, I do. You know, because he knew I like to draw. And I was designing, doing like, you know, logos and race car graphics, you know, on the side, but it wasn't anything like super serious. So I remember walking into the doors at Disney and being like, I never want to work on a car ever again.
Yeah.
Just because I saw what they did visually. And, and like I said, I'd always kind of had that pipe dream in the back of my head, but I'd kind of suppressed it with, you know, responsibility and all that kind of stuff.
Which is also a familiar tale. Please continue. Yeah.
And so I remember visiting the studio and just being super inspired. And at that time too, a friend of mine who's a conceptual artist in Hollywood, he found out I like to draw, and he was doing a comic. And so he invited me to be on the team to do pencils. So all of a sudden here I'm like seeing Disney, having this guy pitch me a kind of a comic strip, which I was always still doing characters. And then all of a sudden, I started applying at different studios, but I realized that my art wasn't up to a professional level yet. It was still kind of trapped in that kind of in between high school and learned a little bit of college, whatever. I realized that I needed to go back to school. And by this time I was older, and it was kind of like, oh, do I drop everything I'm doing to pursue this dream of becoming an artist? And I was like, yeah. And my wife was crazy supportive. Like I couldn't have done it without her. Yeah. Mad shout out to her for sure. So I remember deciding, okay, I went and researched some different schools, and, you know, took a trip back down to California, which is where I'm originally from. I grew up just outside of San Diego, and visited a bunch of schools there. But the one that made the most sense was one that was just 20 minutes down the road from my house in Salt Lake. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go here, enrolled, and it ended up being an amazing experience. You know, school is awesome, blah, 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 blah. Fast forward, I've been out of school for a while, and I've worked in-house at a couple studios and done some illustration. And then I decided to pursue a master's degree, just because I felt like, it's not that I had stagnated, but I felt like I really wanted to push myself and set myself up for the future, because I did see teaching as something I wanted to do down the road. But at the college level, I was talking to actually my old professors, and they're saying, you know what, you're a great artist. You have a lot of skill and a lot of talent, which I thought was nice of them to say. It's like, but, academics want you to have that degree. They want you to go and, show that you've kind of reached that terminal level on your education. And so I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And so I decided to look at grad schools and went through that whole thing where I started looking at different schools, traveling, meeting with different people. And I found a grad school that worked for me. And that was the University of Hartford in Connecticut, of all places. And enrolled there. And it's funny, within being there for, maybe 6 months in the grad school program, I got a call from a friend who was teaching at the same university that I attended. Said, hey, we had a faculty member who has to have an emergency surgery. He had cancer, which is unfortunate. But we need someone to take his classes. And we know that you are currently getting your degree, and that opens up all sorts of doors. So they invited me to come teach, which was cool. And that was animation, which I have experience in animation, but very little. They invited me to be a part of their faculty, and I taught a intro to animation class, had a great group of students. And then after that, the illustration department called me up and said, hey, we've got more classes for you to teach the following semesters. Are you interested? And I said, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I kind of just, I don't want to say fell into it, but going and getting that degree kind of opened up those doors. And I completed the degree this last summer. In fact, the new semester starts tonight. So I have a night class that I teach.
That's awesome.
But, yeah, so it's for me, teaching college is crazy. And if I went back to my, high school self, said, hey, you'd be teaching college, in your late 30s, I would have laughed and been like, no way. Because for me in high school, like, I didn't see school in my career at all.
No,
I was just like, oh. I liked high school. I liked the teachers, but I just learned differently. I don't know if it's being visual or being, more right brain, but it just wasn't for me. But as I matured and got older, I really liked it. But yeah, it's been an amazing experience, and I just really enjoy the giving back essence of teaching. Yeah, and just sharing that kind of what I've learned in my career and my thirst to develop my art skills with them. And students are so hungry, and they just want to learn everything you have to give to them. And
it's so important, especially I think with art. It's so important for us to share all that because, it's knowledge that has to get handed down. You can't learn everything on Google and YouTube, But you need artists that are willing to share that gift and that talent and teach other people, because a lot of artists, I think, you may have experienced many that can be incredibly selfish, who wouldn't want to necessarily share that gift. But there also must be challenges too with much like everything else, there must be challenges teaching a creative art, because is there that fine line of like hurting somebody's feelings and trying to be constructive. I'm sure there is.
That's honestly, it's the hardest part is grading. Yeah. In that, because, you give the assignments, you teach them, like, for instance, last semester I was teaching digital painting, and usually I'll give them an assignment that I would have received as a professional, whether we're doing character design, whether we're doing a spot illustration for a magazine, whatever it is. But you give them the assignment and you give them a new skill to learn within whatever program we're doing. So they're kind of building up their arsenal of digital painting weapons. And then they all work really hard. They put a lot of time and effort into them. And then it's like, okay, well, it's the thing that we established early on in the art department is that this isn't personal. We're trying to help you to grow as a visual artist. Yeah. And as from kids, when we, like for English, for instance, if we do something in English and a teacher grabs a red pen and comes back and marks all over that, we accept that. because that's how we've been conditioned, right? Okay, my punctuation's wrong, or my grammar's not correct, or my structure's bad, and we go back and fix it. We don't have our feelings hurt.
Right.
But with art, it's so expressive, and it comes a lot from inside.
Yeah.
And in college, one of the best things that happened for me is a professor explained it that same way. It's like, look, I'm not here to dash your dreams and rip apart your soul and whatever else, but I am here with a red marker, just like your English teacher, to help show you how you can improve. And so I have that same talk with my students. And I said, look, I know you're all on different levels. I know you're all working hard to achieve the same goal, and you all want to do this thing, which it's a lifelong ambition, but you got to understand that I'm grading you on this, I'm grading you on that, I'm grading you on this, and so then, when you get to those points and you talk about it, and I feel like, whenever we have an assignment, we have a group critique. So we're all sitting together and we're looking over each other's work and we're being constructive. But then I also give them a personal critique when I actually submit their grade. Sure. And so they can kind of see what I was thinking. And the nice thing is with the way that I like to teach is, it's like I've never been given an assignment from a client and be like, okay, boom, you've done it. That's it. There's always revisions, always things to fix.
Yeah.
And I feel it's that same with my students. So with them, it's like, okay, here's the assignment. You guys, here's the deadline. Great. Okay, now you have until the end of the semester to refine it or to fix things that we talked about in the critique or one-on-one. And I feel like that's really helpful to them in that they can continue to not just abandon what they did and be like, oh, all right, Adam gave me a terrible grade. I'm throwing it in the garbage. They can go and fix it.
Yeah.
And really perfect themselves, because it's a tough business. It's a tough crowd. And I feel fortunate that a lot of my clients call me and hire me for me because they know what I do. So I'm not having to jump through that hoop of trying to impress them. There are times when they say, hey, we have this style. Can you match this? Instead of course,
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think that's the fun thing in teaching is just kind of helping them progress and realize that, we're all going to suck at some point in our lives. And the whole thing is just to get better and it's all going to happen through baby steps and accepting criticism. And
it must be cool for them to be able to look back too, perhaps at the end of the semester and see like, this is what you gave me at the beginning and this is your final revised version. They must be able to see that, it must be a really cool journey for them. So as far as professionally, what are some things that are there things you're working on now? Maybe there's a lot of times you can't talk about these things, but is there stuff always in the back burner as well as teaching? Is it a constant thing for you? Yeah. A lot of stuff I've been doing lately are NDA, which is non-disclosure agreements, and so I can't really talk a lot about those projects, but they're cool. That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah. But and so for the last 3 years, I've been doing grad school and I've been doing some of these more bigger studio projects.
Yeah.
But on the side, I still do like designs. Like today, I just finished up a design for a board graphic, which was always been a pipe dream of mine to design that stuff. And my cousin's actually a professional flow rider. I don't know. It's like if you go and see those artificial waves that people are surfing at, like inside a building.
Right.
He does that stuff professionally and travels the globe. And last year he was giving a pro model from a company called Ash Flow Boards. And so we worked out a graphic for that. And then his board sold really well. And so he called me to do the second one.
Right.
And so I just finished that one today, actually, and pretty excited about that. And, I love the painting. I posted a little snippet of it on Instagram, which is like a skull underwater or whatever.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. But that's all part of the thing. And that's that for me is, on top of teaching and then on top of some of these bigger studio gigs, it's fun just to do these smaller jobs, which are kind of more passionate for me.
Yeah. Was it hard for you to develop that skin regarding like criticism and things like that? Or did the professor you mentioned just kind of open the door for you and you thought, that's cool? I'm sure maybe you still get times where people go, could you tweak this? And it kind of hurts a little bit. You're like, well,
Well, I think that's the nature of the business. You just kind of got to be a yes man.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'll fix it for you. Then when we're done with our emails, I'm like, oh man, But then I totally get it, because, for instance, like with college, they're giving me my grade, right? And so my job is my goal, in fact, in college was to be like, okay, you're giving my grade, you've given me these parameters, I'm going to try and do as best I can to get to those parameters.
Right. Just to earn those checkpoints almost,
Yeah. But then all of a sudden I'm like realizing like, oh, this is how you work with people.
Yeah.
They have these things that they want, and instead of them giving you a grade, they're giving you a paycheck. And so as and you got to be smart with your contracts, but you, in your contract, I usually like to have so many revisions. And then after that we renegotiate, but for the most part, it's like, my job is to take what you have in your mind and basically throw it up on paper or on a digital canvas.
Yeah.
And so if you're not happy with it, I'm constantly trying to revise it and get to something where we can both be happy. But it's a bit of a challenge at first, and I like to think I accept criticism fairly well.
I think it comes with age, is what I've learned.
Yeah. For sure. Like my thesis defense committee, when I was finishing up my master's, I was in a room full of 5 artists that I had looked up to, a couple of my whole life, and all of a sudden here I am in a room with these people defending my current body of work, and one of them was asking like, hey, I'm this is great, this is looking really good, but can I offer up some criticism? I'm like, yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
And my typography has never been great. And they said, and some of them I had put this typography on there. They're like, if you would lose the typography, this painting would be so much better. And I'm like, I 100% agree. And you could see like a weight had been lifted from everybody in the room. Like, we didn't know how you're going to take that.
Right. Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I'm fine getting rid of that. It's like, to me, I'd rather draw and paint cartoons, and the text and type is just to kind of make everything look to a certain thing. And,
yeah.
And, even today, I'll get comments on Instagram, or I'll get private messages, or I'll be working on client work. And for me, it's just like some of the stuff where I'm like, well, thank you, I appreciate your criticism,
Yeah.
And then I just don't worry about it. But then like clients or other colleagues or people that I feel like, I don't want to say matter, but I feel like their opinions are valid.
Yeah. I think that is the difference. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. That's even with music, it's happened for me where, I'd get some person say, oh, maybe you should try to sing this song in this different way or something. And your thought is, it's not, buddy, just don't worry about it, but then I've had other guys, other people would tell you things, and it comes out completely differently. For example, I once wrote a really slow, I pictured it as a really old acoustic blues song. The ones you hear where it's definitely really old, the recorder's in the other side of the room, the guitar's slightly out of tune, it's just one dude with an old acoustic. That's how I visioned it, really slow. Yeah. I played it for my buddies in my band, and they said, listen, man, it's a cool song, and but we need to, and his exact words were, we need to put some balls on it. And he turned it into a rock blues song, and after that it became my favorite song that we played together. Wow. And but it was only because I was able to go, okay, sure, you show me what you got. Because if I would have gone the other way, then no one would have heard that stupid, slow, out-of-tune song, and it wouldn't have become what we really enjoyed. So I think as artists, it's equally as important to be able to accept that.
Yeah, and that's what I miss. Like, I've been freelance for so long, but working in a studio, having that kind of interaction where it's all about the greater good, and how can we make this project better? And so hearing about your experience is like, I think that's the benefit of having bandmates and working with fellow artists on projects, is because everybody just wants to make it better. And if you're so closed off, or like, I am the artiste, I have reached my zenith of whatever. You're like, no, dude, just listen to what people have to say.
Yeah, because everybody wants better. I started as a young kid, and it was, I'm the singer, you guys stand back there, and I'll tell you what songs we're playing, and I didn't mean it as a malicious way. I was just a young, stupid kid, as we all were. But then when I met these other musicians, and I've said it before, I had no business being in a band with these guys. They were that talented musically. I was just a fairly good singer and a passable guitar player. They were phenomenal professional musicians. So once I was able to open up and accept, by the end of our sets, I used to just turn my guitar down and just not play it and just sing into the mic and let the band do what they did. So I imagine, freelance from that, because now I play, when you don't play in a group, there's that slight loneliness almost, isn't there? Hey folks, thanks for listening to MattLees Gets Creative.
Now, I know people can't afford to be a patron for each of the podcasts that they love, but if you're looking to put a little support towards an independent podcast, it would make you a loyal part of our team. Those fees would be used for the obvious things like the production of the episodes, but we're also looking to pay it forward, as each month I'll donate half of the total patron subscriptions to the Valindra Cancer Center in Cardiff. Because, in addition to being a musician and a podcaster, I am also a cancer survivor. As well as bonus clips and outtakes from various interviews, patrons would also have access to live streams and at least one exclusive episode per month. Bonus episodes could be additional interviews or unheard guests, as well as performances and readings by musicians, poets, authors, etc. Loyal supporters would also get some digital earlove with shoutouts on these special shows. As a member of the club, you'll also have spoiler alert access, where you'll find out about an upcoming guest, have the chance to submit questions, and even have early access to some of those episodes. This show will always remain free for all of the people that are kind enough to listen and to join us on our journey. But if you're looking to give a little back and help us out too, you are most welcome, and we would appreciate your support. And that's at patron.podbean.com/MattLees Gets Creative. patron.podbean.com/MattLees Gets Creative. Thanks for listening.
But there also must be a real struggle working in a team creatively. Is there ever a moment where you have to collaborate visually with people? So like you have to draw something and they have to add to it or touch it up, and then that a moment where you're like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, don't touch it. Don't touch it.
At first, that's how it was. And then it's also kind of like at the end of like if you're working in production, right? You know, one of the jobs I worked on was conceptual art for a live action project. And I'm a cartoonist, and they hired me to come in and draw realistic weapons and armors and design props and stuff. Right. And so for me, it was like, okay, here I am in the art department with a team of equally talented artists, and we're working on this cool stuff. And I hand off my concept to my art director. Then he takes some of that. He's like, oh, I like a bit of this, and I like a bit of her stuff over there, and a bit of his stuff. Yeah. And he creates the final concept, and you're like, dude, that was awesome. Yeah. You know, and then as it's like, he was calling me up. He's like, dude, check this out. And he sent me a picture of like the prop that I helped design. And it's like a fully rendered, you know, prop. And it's like, well, that was awesome. Yeah. You know, so kind of cool to see in that regards.
Is that something covered by an NDA that you can't talk about?
Yeah.
That's so hip though. That's so cool, isn't it? We all wish to have that where we're like, man, if people knew you must have moments where you're like, if people knew what I was doing right now on this computer system or on this tablet in my house in Utah, you said, people just, you wouldn't think of that way, would you? Pretty cool. Is it once things are released, you're allowed to talk about it, or are there things where you're just never allowed to mention it?
Well, if it's released,
right,
usually I can talk about it.
Right.
But if it gets shelved, then it's It's off topics for.
So there could potentially be like dudes that have drawn, say, other Batmobiles that we'll just never know about. And there's probably a guy somewhere going, "My Batmobile was so much better than this Batmobile."
For sure. Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah,
like studios are notorious. Like, you'll get funding and you'll go work on a project for 6 months to a year, and then at the end, the higher ups or the people that are producing are like, "Well, we're going to shelve that project. Move on to this one, or we need funds that we would have spent on your project, which probably isn't going to go anywhere, and we'll put it over here." And you're like, "Oh, well, at least I got paid."
Yeah. And you're always creating. So you're always maybe learning through that process, I guess, know, so, but that can be really hurtful, I guess, too, especially if it's a project you really enjoy. And then you think, oh, they're not going to use this. That's such a shame,
Well, and the hard thing too, is with those types of projects, you don't own the artwork.
Right.
So it's basically like you're a work for hire, and so the studio owns everything. So if you come out and share that, you're basically like sharing copyrighted or, whatever information. So that it gets legally, and then if you're that guy, then you get blacklisted in the industry because you can't keep a secret. Or
right. Yeah, you don't want to be that guy. Yeah, I remember learning when I worked in radio broadcasting. I had to learn that lesson the hard way when I had worked on these promos that I made. You always hear things like, "You are listening to 107," and they put all the cool sound effects. I used to make those things. And I remember cutting one for my own show, and then hearing it on the actual radio recut with the name of the station. So it was my work, but they revoiced the vocal part. And of course, stupid kid me was like, they ain't gonna do that to me. And I remember going to the station director and being like, "Hey man, that's my promo, and you're letting this guy use it on his show? Like, what's the deal with this? I'm not cool with this. And he had to sit me down and tell me, anything you create in these walls belongs to me, sir. This is my. You want to go do that? You go build your own radio station. To which I was like, well, he's got a point because I can't build my own radio station. But I had to learn that the hard way and the embarrassing way. But maybe sometimes those are the lessons that stick. I don't know.
Yeah.
So you've now completed your master's.
Right.
Congratulations, by the way. That's an unbelievable thing. You must imagine looking back now to yourself working as a mechanic, considering, oh man, I really miss drawing. Would that guy believe you now if you were sitting where you are teaching with a master? I know you said in high school you wouldn't believe it, but I imagine even 5-10 years ago wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's honestly it's weird to think like the progression of things. And with the auto stuff, I thought, I was racing cars. I had a professional racing license. I was traveling. Right. We were all over the place, just trying to go fast, which was great. But it was I don't know, that drawn, like I always thought like, oh, one day I'll be a professional artist, and then fast forward 10, 11 years, all of a sudden, like, here I am. We're like, whoa, this is cool. This is fun. And and I love what I do. And I when I get back out of the racetrack or I'm around my friends' garages, I feel like a recovering addict, where I smell like the race fuel, or I'll see stuff they're working on. I'm like, oh, I want to get back into that, but it's fun to kind of be on the outside, and cars and that stuff is fun again. Yeah. Where, it's just a job. And the thing with art is like, it's still just super fun all the time, and it's like, I get to kind of pick and choose which projects I want to work on now, which is nice. Yeah. And so it's definitely hard, there's hours for sure, but having that or thinking that I would have a master's degree, like my parents like freaked out when I told them I was going to grad school. Right. And the nice thing is like they came out to Connecticut to see me graduate, which was great. And, my mom, she was an educator, and, it was just always kind of fun and she got her master's in education as well. And so it was kind of like a nice thing to be able to share with her that,
that's really cool. It's funny you mentioned race cars. This is a thing where, you'll be able to laugh at me a little bit. There was a day many moons ago where they had a media race at a local racetrack in Canada when I lived there. Working in radio broadcasting, and much like yourself, it became sort of like the job where I wasn't Wolfman Jack like I wanted to be. I was, and here's the new single from Nickelback on Cool FM. We'll be right back. And I hated it, right? Like I was like, you're such a sellout. But anyway, we did this race, and none of the other DJs showed up for this racetrack day. And it was, I'm going to sound so ignorant, please forgive me. It was the car from, the Tom Cruise movie. One of those cars, the big boxy looking guys. Yeah. I don't know what the actual term for one of those is, but that's the car. So the morning show DJ yells at me and says, nobody else shows up. How about you and me race? And if you beat me, you can have the morning show for a week. And as a up and coming radio kid, I'm like, I'm going to murder this dude. So they put me in they put me in the fireproof suit, which does not make you feel confident right away. You're like, what is this? And they're like, it's a fireproof suit. And I was like, never needed one of those before. Excellent. So they got me in it. He puts me in the car because, the door doesn't open. That's not a thing most people know, is it? So now I have to climb in it with this whole crowd watching me. And I'm like, oh, please don't fall over and look like a jerk in this car. So I get in and he leans down with his hand and hits the pedal for me. And the car's in neutral and it's moving as he's hitting it. This thing is like purring. So it's just me and another DJ. We get the flag waved us, and there's the pace car in front of us. Very important, because I didn't know at the time what a pace car was. Okay, so it leads us around, but immediately the other DJ shoots off and overtakes the pace car and just starts running around. Now, I don't know at this time that I've now won the race, because he's overtaken the pace car and they've now awarded me the race. Because I'm too busy being too scared to open up this car. Like, I'm just sort of like plugging along and I won't hit it, to the point that there's a dude running beside me, laughing at me. And I look back at it now with like, I didn't want to wreck the guy's car. I didn't want to, I don't know. I shouldn't be driving this car. I have no business driving this car. I look back on it now though, and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have opened it up and just, because I don't want to say what's the worst that could have happened, because that's a scary thing. But I just, you mentioned racing, and that was my first thought was, man, I embarrassed myself in front of 300 people once. So what advice would you have given me if you were there at the time about racing that car? Because I was in no position to do so.
Well, it's funny because when I was doing it, I actually started instructing at the racetrack. So teaching, I guess, has always been a little bit.
Yeah, it's always been part of you, I think.
But that first time when you're in the back of a race car and you have no clue what's going on and you're like, don't know where to brake, don't know where to accelerate, all that stuff. And, you got the butterflies in your tummy, sometimes it's just better just to kind of start opening up and just really just start, with each lap, just kind of pushing it just a little faster and a little faster. And, it's like that first time you step on the accelerator and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, you get,
I think that's what ruined it for me, was that like roller coaster boost off. And I was like, no. And I picture the music in my head as I'm just driving slow around the track, just enjoying it.
Well, and I'd grown up around a racetrack. And so I kind of see my grandpa and my uncles and my dad do it. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing, a lot of people when I bring up to the track is they're used to driving kind of everyday cars, and cars that aren't built for speed or don't accelerate that well. And I'm kind of numb to it, because
it's just normal for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And so stepping on the accelerator is one thing, but then getting it to stop and turn was a ride, so it's, I think for me, like with anything, it's like, slow and steady and just kind of keep pushing it and be like, oh, I can go a little faster around this corner. I can push it a little harder here. I can break a little deeper into that. And so for most people, it's like, okay, there's that progression. And, I've had people that I've instructed that have no business being behind the wheel of a car at all. I've got stories to tell, and it's, as I look back at now, I'm thinking, okay, I'm in my mid-20s. I have a wife. I have a couple of kids. And here I am with a complete stranger strapped into their car, and we're trying to go as fast as we can around a racetrack. It's like,
I have not thought my choices through. Man, I should go into art, I think. It's really, really scary, actually, isn't it? But it's all good from there, because now you're working at a job that you love. Sounds like teaching is really cool for you. Having a master's is just such a cool thing, man. I don't know anybody that has a master's, so there you have it. That's one of those incredible things. So do you have a favorite part about teaching, and do you have a favorite part about being a visual artist as a career?
Favorite part about teaching is honestly the students. Kind of like we talked about, like having that first assignment they do and then the last one. And I try to mirror the two, so then they can kind of see like a steady progression. Yeah. Like, look where we started, look where you ended. Yeah. And then they can kind of have like this really cool thing that they're proud of. And also with teaching, I try to like give them assignments that will work for them, Like, just because I give you this assignment doesn't mean I want you to copy like how I would do it. Right. Or copy. I want you to find you in the work. Yeah. And so seeing a student that finds themselves and really kind of discovers like, oh, wow, this is how I would do it if I was given that assignment. It was a big breakthrough moment for them, for sure. Yeah. And then as far as like for being a visual artist, it's really cool just to be able to like come up with like cool crap and just, it's like, just watching TV or being out in public or seeing something that inspires you to do a whole series of paintings.
Because you can create I'm sure all us nerds and pop culture guys watch those things and go, man, it'd be cool if you could see a Ninja Turtle with Scrooge McDuck fighting Darth Vader. Where for yourself, you can be like, I know what that would look like. I'll show you. And you could just draw it. That must be really, really awesome.
Yeah. I was looking at an Alex Ross painting, and it was Boba Fett fighting Batman. And I'm thinking, this is the single greatest painting I've ever seen in my life. Don't mind the Renaissance guys, whoever else. But this right here, this speaks to me. Yeah. And it was so mind-blowing. I sent it to my friend who's a huge Boba Fett fan, and I'm a huge Batman fan. And I'm like, this is it. This is the painting that we've both been searching for our entire lives.
Yeah. It completed you.
Yeah. And that's what I think that's the greatest thing, is being able to see something visual in my head and then go through the steps that I've kind of learned and then just create that and be like, whoa, this is cool. And the whole process is great. And, and it's fun to look back on some of those paintings years later and be like, oh yeah, that was good. Because there are critiques for sure. But, I look at everything as kind of a benchmark of like, okay, I've stepped up here. And then you can also see ones where you've kind of regressed a little bit and be like, I didn't do as good as I should have on that one. Or
that was a bad day.
Yeah. But, ultimately I sit back and I feel blessed that I get to scribble and draw every day. And, there are days when I'm just like, I'm going to hang out with the family today and not pick up a pencil.
I think that's the real blessing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't have to go to the shop every day or the factory every day. You can be like, nope, you know what? Today I'm not drawing anything. I'm just going to hang out with the family, which is, what it's about, I think.
For sure.
I always ask a question about method before we get ready to close down is there a specific OCD like method when you work? Do you need a specific mug? Do you need specific music? Because some people have very specific things and other people don't have anything and look at me like I'm crazy when I ask that type of thing.
Yeah, I would say, I always have a drink, music. I've kind of substitute music for podcasts in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think so have I.
I just feel like I've always got to learn something. But the funny thing is I don't listen to art podcasts.
Right.
Like I really try to listen to, like stuff that we're doing here with people that are from all different walks of life that may be creative.
Yeah.
And so to me, I always want to be learning. I always want to be growing. Sometimes like one of my traditions, whenever I get a new job, I'll buy a new audiobook. Right. And, and sometimes that audiobook can be 10 hours. Sometimes it can be 24 hours.
Yeah.
But then I'm just listening to that book as I'm working. And it's a nice way to kind of, to be creative. Cause the thing for me, if it's dead silent, like all of a sudden I'm left to my thoughts and I start thinking about random things like, oh man, later today, I've got to go over to here and get this prescription, or I've got to go over here and do this thing. And if I have like a book that I'm listening to, I can kind of almost escape what I'm doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Turn your brain off while keeping your brain on, Yeah. Because I'm the same. I always have an audiobook or a podcast or music going if I'm alone or I'm working on stuff that I don't need to listen to if it's music or something. But I don't like being stuck alone with my own thoughts either. Maybe that's the other curse of creative people.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm starting a new contract job where I'm actually going to be in-house for the next month or two. And I've been to that office a lot of times and worked with that staff on other projects, but now it's like I'm actually going to be in-house working there. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? And so I'm like piling all these podcasts and looking for stuff to kind of, because it's really quiet in there too.
Right.
So kind of like, all right, well, we'll get it figured out.
Yeah, audiobooks are a really great thing too. And I recently, because I do different work for sound design, I make music for people's plays and audio plays and things like that, which can be hard too. Because sometimes I'll work really hard on a song, and they'll send back, like after all this work, all they'll send back is, does it have to be a piano at 2 minutes and 30 seconds? And you're like, part of you wants to go, what do you know about it, man? Like, really? Yeah. But you have to kind of go, okay, it's cool. It's your project. What would you prefer? Yeah. Where was I going? I got upset at myself again. But I don't know where I completely lost my thought by getting upset by a specific story about a piano, which I now have to cut out because I can't let it out in the public because he'll know who it is. And there's that whole thing. Audiobooks. We were talking about audiobooks. I recently started auditioning for narrating audiobooks. I have a friend who lives locally here in South Wales, and he wants me to do his next book, which hasn't been finished yet. So that was great. But I thought, well, if he wants me to do it, that must be easy. And it's kind of that whole uneducated thing where you just dive into something. And I recorded this demo, and this audition was for no NDAs here, ladies and gentlemen. It was a book about video games. And I thought, I'm cut out for this. So I read the thing into the mic, all cocky, Mr. Radio announcer, all these years in broadcasting, sent it off, got an email back 2 days later, which was, you have not been selected at this time. And I had that moment of like, oh, this is work. I can't just step into it. I actually have to work hard at this thing, and then I watched a bunch of videos and read a bunch of documents about how to do it. And they said the worst thing for an audiobook narrator is to have a history in radio broadcasting.
Oh, really?
Because you're tempted to turn into radio guy. Chapter 2. And as somebody who, like you said, you listen to audiobooks, nobody wants to listen to somebody reading a book like they're reading the news on the radio. You want it to be natural, be different, But I get you. I'm always listening to stuff like that. What are some of your favorite podcasts to listen to?
I've been listening to this one lately called Cold.
Right.
And there's a local murder here, which is crazy, but this dude killed his wife, and then they spent all this years investigating it, but they didn't make any arrests. And then the jerk went up to Washington and blew himself up with his 2 little boys, and it was this really sad thing. But the local news station has reopened the case, and they went through and did their own investigation on it.
Right.
So it's quite fascinating to hear them go through, and literally you see all these warning signs, and it's all about domestic abuse and really trying to save women and children and other men from, these things where this lady, when you piece together the history of this guy, and what he went through, and then what he ended up submitting his wife and children to. It's just like,
Right.
oh, your heart goes out to him, and you feel bad for other people going through it. But it was such a huge thing here in Little Utah, where I was like, they just released the whole series, and I'm on episode 3 right now, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, but I like that one. I love the 9 Club from Chris Roberts. It's all about skateboarding and that stuff.
Yeah.
And there's one called Jump Street Podcast that I listen to, and a lot, like I said, a lot of it's more like in the outside of the art realm.
Yeah.
Jason Seiler just released a new podcast that is awesome. And it's all with creative professionals, and from artists to musicians to whoever, and so that kind of stuff to me is always interesting and fun to listen to.
Yes, but I love the cold case ones too, because some of them are so fascinating. And it seems like all these places all over the world have their story of like, there's this one time this husband or this wife or this, and now that they're able to go back and go in depth on them is such a cool thing. It makes me wish that back in 2009, when I started my first podcast, I would have done a quote unquote proper one, not just a bunch of guys sitting around yelling at each other and cursing. The original idea was musicians talking about music, and it was called Legend in My Spare Time, because obviously on the weekends we were playing out and everything. Now it's just me and my friends sitting around cursing at each other, really, which is why I'm starting the new one, Gets Creative, because I host Comic-Cons, I host panels and things at Comic-Cons here in Cardiff, and I'd end up getting a really cool chance to interview somebody like yourself, but uploading it in the same feed as the Cursey Sweary podcast. So then when that person shares it and puts the link out there, if it's not the most recent episode, people go back, they click it, and it's me and my buddy cursing, and they turn off probably after 20 seconds if that's not what they're looking for.
Right.
I like a bunch of foul-mouthed dudes sitting around as much as the next guy sometimes, but you also sometimes want the other thing. So that's why I thought it was important to separate the feeds and go with my own season at a time thing. And I've talked to people all over the creative realms, and there's more in the background I'm waiting for. And it was really cool of you to agree to do this. You'd be amazed how many people ghost you and just completely know, and what I thought, especially about the artists, I've talked to a lot of artists during this time, and I think it's because it's so visual. You see it on Instagram or Twitter or online, and it's nothing about the person, it's just the art stands out to you, and you think, that's cool. And I found yourself strictly through Instagram, because based on other stuff I'd like, your work started showing up, in the feed. And I started to recognize it, and then you're thinking, man, who is this guy? He keeps popping up everywhere. So that's it's also really cool that you're also still a fanboy, because I saw the pictures with yourself and Jim Lee.
Dude.
So when I saw that, I was like, oh, he's one of us. He's one of us, as in he's one of the,
Yeah, I've tried not to fanboy out on too many people, but man, when I meet like Jim Lee or Tim Sale, I met Neil Adams a while back ago, and it's just, these guys are such huge influences on us, and, same thing in the animation industry. I've met people that are they're creators. I've been watching their stuff, and, just to see them and appreciate them and realize, like, thank you for everything you've, it's
so important in your formative years to develop what you became and everything like that. So it's the same when if I meet a musician, that I really admire, you have to try so hard not to be a fanboy.
Oh yeah.
But sometimes it's really tough. There's a show in the UK, a comedy called Only Fools and Horses. It ran from when I was born in the 80s, and I think the last episode was only like 4 years ago, something like that. Anyway, so for my entire life, this show has existed. And at a Comic-Con, I got to interview one of the cast who was on a panel. And of course, I had to look at this guy and go, his name is not the character's name. He's a real person. Don't ask him any questions as if he's the character. Don't fan out, oh my God, am I staring at him? I think I'm staring at him. I think he's looking at me. And then at the end of the show, I kind of just let myself go a bit. And I was like, man, I really loved your character on the show. And I kind of fanboyed a little bit. And luckily, he took it well, and he was very kind. He wasn't like, okay, weirdo. He could kind of see I was like, but it's like you said, it's a thank you. I was thanking him for the years of like escapism and entertainment, but sometimes it must be so hard not to fanboy out.
Oh, yeah. I remember meeting Tim Sale for the first time. Well, the only time. But I was at the Denver Comic-Con, and his table was literally across and down just a few from mine. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go meet him.
Right.
And I had the Batman Long Halloween Unwrapped edition, so it was just straight up Tim's work. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And no one was at his table. And I walked up and said, hey, Tim, I'm just a really big fan of yours. And this is, and I'm in my mind, I'm like, stop.
Yeah.
But I'm like, thanks so much. And, he's my favorite Batman artist,
Yeah.
Sorry, Jim.
Yeah.
But I just love how zany and wacky everything is. And
yeah.
Anyways, he was really awesome. And he just was really, accommodating of me being just a super nerd about that. And, ended up drawing me a little sketch of Batman just like Jim did. And then, when I met Jim, it was like, Jim, I've been looking at his work since I was like 10, and to meet Jim, and he was just so cool and just so nice. And, that's the thing that like, for me, like when I meet professionals, there's the people who are all mired and just like, I'm just doing this because I have to. And you're like, dude, you suck. And then you meet someone like Jim Lee or Tim Sale or whoever, and they're just so cool, and they're like understanding of like what they mean to you, know, because, I had a great childhood. My parents were loving and, all that good stuff, but still it was like I had escaped to these comic books, and all of a sudden I was in these adventures, and, these guys are, especially being a visual guy, these guys are guiding me through with pictures, and it's just so cool to meet these guys and realize that they're as cool as they are on paper, they're 10 times cooler in person. And
because I'm sure there's always that fear of like you don't meet your heroes,
Yeah.
But it also must be cool because you get to meet them as an equal, not as like, not as one of me on the other side of the table. You're not just a guy saying, hey man, I really, really like your work. You're saying, hey, you helped me develop into an artist too. And that must be cool to kind of see them almost be on the same level as them in those times.
It's crazy to think that we work in the same industries, and I don't know. I think of those guys, and and other times I've been at conventions and people come up and have those same experiences with me, and it's super humbling, and think I'm nobody. I haven't done anything really on their level, but to people to come up and talk about what an influence my work's been on them is just super. Gratifying, and it makes doing what I do really worth it,
And
it's a lot of fun.
Seems like you're able to handle it with humility, like you said, which is such a, nothing better than when you really love something somebody did, and then you get to tell them and they're cool about it, I've had those Comic-Con fanboy experiences that didn't go well, and it could have just been bad moment for a dude on a bad day. But you never forget that moment of the one time I met so-and-so from that show and he wasn't nice to me, No way that person remembers that, but I do. So, no, of course, and nor should they really, what some dude from Wales thinks about their 20 seconds they got to talk. But if you're able to handle it and look at it with that whole, I'm the same, so I'm able to handle it and accept that, must be a really cool experience for everyone involved. But I imagine you've had the other side of that too, the not so fun experiences where you think, you know what, you're a jerk, I'm just going to write you off and not really worry about it.
Yeah. Well, in the professional athletes thing, I've always met people that are, you grew up watching the skateboarder or the snowboarder, and then you meet them in person, you're like, I'm okay, I'm not meeting you ever again,
Yeah.
And, but in the art world, it's nice because, it's creative. It's like, we're all coming from the same, creative pool, and we all want to just kind of get there. And the people who have done a little better, it's like, oh, this is awesome. And it's kind of a giving back thing that I was telling you about with teaching. It's like, you guys are the future generation, and I want this craft to go on, and I want you guys to basically know everything that I know. And, so it's always just fun to be able to, share and be that mentor to them. And then it's funny because I look at professors and mentors that I had, they're all of a sudden now I want to say on the same level, but I feel like all of a sudden it's like I'm considered like you said, an equal. It's like, oh, it's like, here I am, this guy who I look up to and admire and still admire, and all of a sudden they're talking to me as a colleague rather than a student
or a fanboy, as we all like to say. That's a really, really awesome. I know, meeting athletes, you mentioned, like when I grew up, I was a big wrestling fan, and when I finally got to meet Bret the Hitman Hart, who was always my boy, he was my guy when I grew up, and I had the same moment of you where I was like in line for like an hour, I think, and I was like, play it cool, we got this, play it cool. And of course it became, oh man, it's so good to meet you, man, and all your, when I grew up, and I really appreciate everything you do. And he handled it such a champ. And this was in Wales, but obviously I grew up in Canada, hence the Canadian accent. which Brett picked up on, and he said, "You don't sound like you're from Wales," and I explained. And as I walked away, I was handling it so cool. I finally walked away. I didn't say anything stupid. He signed all my extra stuff, even though there was a strict limit, and I was like, "Yo, Brett, will you sign this?" He's like, "I'll sign whatever you want, man." So he signed it all. And as I walk away, he yelled to me and said, "You make sure you hold the flag of Canada here for me in Wales." That was it. I was like, "I will, Brett." As you're just walking away, like, "I will, Brett. Just get me out of this room," So such a cool experience for that.
And you'll remember it forever, and you'll think about that dude with awesomeness. And then, it's just, that's the type of stuff that I think makes those lasting memories. Like Neil Adams has like this, at least to people I've known, he's hasn't been the most cordial, but I remember going up to him at a convention and being like, and I had a table down the road. I'm like, "Hey Neil, I saw you had some, open space on your hands, but I just want to come over and tell you what a huge influence you've been on me, and just thank you for your years of drawing and all that kind of stuff." And I wasn't trying to get anything out of him. And he grabbed me by both hands, like just clasped, and he's like, "Sit down." Nice. And we sat and had like a 45-minute conversation where I'm talking to this guy who's basically defined Batman for me. Yeah. And we have this really great conversation. He starts asking me about my career. I'm like, "Why do you want to know about me?"
Dude, you know who you are? You're like, "Why are you asking me?" Yeah.
And we had just such an amazing experience where we just, at least I did. And it was that same thing where it's like, wow, that was really cool. And then my cousin, who is a huge fanboy, he had the complete opposite experience with them. And, and I'm sure it was one of those things where it's like, you got 1,000 people in line waiting to see you. You're trying to get your stuff signed. Yeah. And, it was interesting to come as a creative to Neil versus like a fanboy trying to get stuff signed. And because I know
he looked at you like an equal. We'll use the same word again. He looked at you like an equal rather than a fanboy. And I think as much as you and I say we've had good and bad experiences, so have those guys, man. He's probably met so many awkward dudes that are just like, let's not stereotype because I am a fanboy, but dudes that look, we don't need to go any further. We all know what I'm sure you do because you've been on the other side of the table. So I'm sure he's had just as many bad experiences as we have. We have to try to remember maybe that they're human too, I remember meeting the cast of Warehouse 13, a show I loved at the time. And one of them, or two of them actually, were amazing to meet, and one of them wasn't, and it's kind of like, I still remember that negative moment where I was like, and now anytime if I see a clip, it's not like, let's be honest, it didn't traumatize me, but if I see a clip of the show, I always think, oh, that guy wasn't very nice to me, and that's such a silly thing to do, but that's, I remember that more than the ones where, oh, this guy gave me a high five. And Eddie McClintock, who played the main guy, was cool enough to send a video to my mom, who really liked the show as well. And she wasn't at the show with me. So I was just in line and I thought, what's the worst that's going to happen? He's not going to remember me. He's going to talk to 1 million people this weekend. Hey, man, my mom and I watched the show together. Would you be willing to say a quick hello to her on video? And he was like, of course I will. What's her name? So I said, and he records the video. And the whole time I had my thumb over the mic on my iPhone. And that's the moment where you're like, well, I can't go back. I can't be like, hey, dude, remember me? Because I didn't have I was cheeky enough to ask you for this thing, but I didn't hit record. It's one of those things, man. But mom took it like a champ and loved it and cherished it. So, even though she couldn't hear it really. But anyway, dude, listen, I want to thank you so much for taking time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I want to wish you so much continued success. Where can people see your work? Because obviously we've talked about it, but it's a podcast. So people definitely want to check you out. Where do they do that?
So you can check me out on Instagram. If you search Munoa 13, MUNOA 13, that's where you can find me on Instagram. Same thing if you go to Facebook, Adam Munoa Illustration, and then also AdamMunoa.com is where you'll find my website and contact info and whatever.
And always open for commissions and things like that. If people want to contact you, different projects and things, you just never know.
For sure. I'm always willing to collaborate and work on some stuff. Things are speeding up right now a little bit, but I'm always open for the next thing, especially, in this world. It's like, there's always some fun and exciting project on the horizon, and I'm down to chat with anybody for sure.
Cool. Again, thank you so much. All the best. Yeah. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Next time on MattLees Gets Creative.
But I didn't seriously consider becoming a professional actor until I was made redundant from my first job. I was given a bag of money, so I was at a crossroads of my life. What do I do? And so I chose. Certain members of my family didn't want me to become a professional actor, so I came to a deal. I said I'd go for 3 auditions, and if I didn't get any of them, then I would still remain being a civil servant or something.
Simon Fisher Becker did not need to go on to become a civil servant. He's a versatile character actor known from Shakespeare to pantomime, film, television, radio, and theater. He'll tell us how he hit the cutting room floor in Harry Potter and how he went on to play Doria Moldovar in Doctor Who. That's next time, right here on MattLees Gets Creative. Please make sure you follow us on social media at ML Gets Creative. Please subscribe. Perhaps consider leaving a review. It really does help. Thanks for listening.